Hey guys, want to thank you for joining us today. Today's going to be just a little bit different. We're going to see a video of kind of a different model of simply the story. We're doing this in a more literate fashion for those groups that are more literate in nature. And so today I invite you to join me for a small Sunday school class where we're talking about the story of Noah and the flood. In particular, the verses dealing with Noah taking the animals and his family into the ark. So just sit back, relax, enjoy. Excuse the audio, did not have the microphone set up that I would like to have set up, but still, hopefully, it might give you some tips or some clues of something you might want to try on your own. So enjoy. So this is a relatively short story because it's not an easy story, not like some of them, but so here's the story. So Noah with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives went into the ark because of the waters of the flood. From the clean animals and unclean animals, birds, every creature that crawls on the ground, two of each, male and female, they came to Noah and entered the ark just as God had commanded him. 7 days later, the floodwaters came on the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the sources of the vast watery depths burst forth. The floodgates of the sky were opened, and the rain fell on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. On that same day, Noah, along with his sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah's wife and his three sons' wives entered the ark with him. They entered it with all the wildlife according to their kinds, all the livestock according to their kinds, all the creatures that crawl on the earth according to their kinds, and every flying creature, all the birds and every winged creature according to their kinds. Two of every creature that has breath of life in it came to Noah and entered the ark. Those that entered, male and female of every creature, entered just as God had commanded him. Then the Lord shut Noah in. So let me try it one more time. And again, I don't know this story, so it's going to be I'll be working on this all this week till my buddy gets here because I don't want to get to the ark and embarrass myself. So Noah with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives went into the ark because of the waters of the flood. From the clean animals and the unclean animals, the birds and every creature that crawls on the ground, two of each, male and female, they came to Noah and entered the ark just as God had commanded him. 7 days later, the floodwaters came on the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day, on that day, all the sources of the vast watery depths burst open. The floodgates of the sky were open, and the rain fell on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. On that same day, Noah, along with his sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah's wife, and his three sons' wives, entered the ark with him. They entered it with all the wildlife according to their kinds, all the livestock according to their kinds, all the creatures that crawl on the earth according to their kinds, every flying creature, all the birds, and every winged creature according to their kinds. Two of every creature that has breath in it came to Noah and entered the ark. Those that entered, male and female of every creature, entered just as God had commanded Noah. Then the Lord shut Noah in. So, I wonder, what do you think it might have been like for Noah and his sons and their wives? Because as far as we know, it had not rained on the earth prior to this, right? According to what the word says. So what do you think it might have been like for them, for these all these years they're working to build the ark. Do you think any of them ever had any doubts? Like, why are we doing this? Kind of.
I would think especially the children might have, or those who had maybe had less interaction with God directly.
Yeah.
Like Noah's probably like, listen, we're doing this, like, I the guy who told me this is reliable, but the kids were like, who said this, Dad? Like, yeah.
Dad, all the guys downtown are kind of laughing at us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is interesting because as far as we know, who do we know that had the conversations with God, whatever those look like? Right?
Sure.
Just Noah. Yeah, so, I mean, I can imagine what it would be like for me to go to Kurt and say, hey, buddy, I was, God appeared to me the other day, and we had a conversation, and he told me we're supposed to, that the whole family's supposed to sell everything they own. We're supposed to buy a farm and move out, edge of town and raise donkeys. I mean, can you imagine how that conversation would go?
Sure.
It would be like, Dad, you got fever? Is that?
First, let's call the doctor.
Yeah, the fact of me raising anything.
We checked to see if Pam had heard it too.
Yeah,
Right.
and there's the reality. Everybody go, okay, what Pam say? Pam heard it. Let's go. Sell it all. No questions asked.
It makes me think, because I don't know much about Shem, Ham, and Japheth's character or their relationship with the Lord, but it makes me think that Noah was pretty unwavering. Like, on a scale of 1 to 10, probably like a 9, because they followed him, at least to a large extent.
Yeah.
For, what was it, like 100 years?
Yeah, it took a little bit.
Yeah. And so, for him to be the only one that God spoke to and to be followed like that, you have to be pretty unwaveringly faithful to what the Lord told you to do.
And let's think about that. So, let's say your granddad got a message in 1921 that this was something God wanted to accomplish. And for 100 years, you've been working on this without seeing the reason come to fruition. Right? I mean, that's that could be a bit of a test.
I feel like it's also like a good commentary on Noah's relationship with his sons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, Noah had a very multi-generational view, and so he was like, for his sons to trust him that deeply, he had to be putting into those relationships, like, so they're not gonna just trust him if he was like, you have to trust me or I'm gonna kill you. Like, no, they saw him walking with the Lord. They saw that Noah's word is true, that like, I can trust my father, that he has good things in store, because that's how, the Lord, fathers us.
Yeah.
And so Noah had that probably because he was in such deep relationship with God. And so I feel like, to me, this is just such a good indicator for fathers. If you want your children to walk in the ways of the Lord, like, invest in that relationship with them, so that when you do something, when you follow the Lord's will, then they're going to be like, oh yeah, they're like, I trust my dad. I know that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah. Well, let's look at this first part. So Noah with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives went into the ark because of the waters of the flood. From the clean animals, the unclean animals, the birds, and every creature that crawls on the ground, 2 of each, male and female, came to Noah and entered the ark, just as God had commanded Noah. That's repeated again towards the end of the story. 7 days later, the floodwaters came on the earth. So basically, we have a synopsis here in these 4 verses of everything going on, right? So, what do you think that might have been like for them? I mean, here they've been building this thing for 100 years, and now it's like, okay, get on. And was it raining yet? From what we can tell.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, just I think so often we're so familiar with God's word. Sometimes we miss the weight. And I love going to the ark and seeing, so it just really makes you think of some things, right? Like, wow, I hadn't thought about that. And every time I pull up and I pull in the parking lot, I'm like, holy crud, this thing is ginormous. I mean, every time I have the exact same reaction. But I mean, what do you think it might have been like for them as family units marching onto this ark that it's coming? This thing that we've been preparing for 100 years is coming.
Yeah. I would imagine it's pretty complex emotions. I mean, I'm assuming they're still having some level of interaction with the people around them, even though they might have been a little distance if they were evil, like it says.
Yeah.
But it's still like knowing, those people are about to die. Go get on this boat, and we're not supposed to bring them. Like, that's got to be pretty heavy just to have, even though you're not the one doing it, it's still like, okay. I'm sure it was a bit testing too. Like, this is a much smaller scale, but I feel like when I first started praying for healing, the Lord would tell me, go pray for that person. There's like this moment where you're like, I'm doing this, and I have no idea if God is going to like show up and do His part now. So they were probably feeling something like that, like, okay, we built this boat, we're getting on it. What if it doesn't work?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just a trusting moment of like, I'm just going for it. They're all probably staring at Noah like, okay, like we did it, like
we're here.
We like, and he's like, I'm just doing what I was told.
Yeah, because they had to wait a week.
Yeah, 7 days. But it is interesting that the animals just started coming to him. So I feel like as soon as that happened, I'm like, okay, you're right.
Yeah.
Like, animals are just walking into the boat now. Like, I think you got it right.
two by twos, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and it completely. Well, we don't know how natural it was back then, but that sounds pretty unnatural. That would be unnatural for right now.
Yeah.
Well, he didn't have to like go gather them out of the forest.
They just came.
That to me is like a thanks, Lord. Like that helped me out there.
There we go. And it might be, and just thinking about this story, I might need to mention that that Noah preached that whole time, right? And so apparently there was opportunity for more people to be on the ark.
Yeah.
So I really like what you said, that I mean, here they're getting on the ark, like, man, I've been faithfully preaching every Sunday and Wednesday, and
it would have been more comforting if more people were like, oh, okay, gotcha, and they like the crowds would have came. But it was like, oh, nobody believes us. Like we're still by ourselves.
Yeah.
That would have been felt pretty isolating.
But God gave them the reason because of the waters of the flood. But the reason hadn't happened yet, right? So when they got on the ark, the reason they were getting on the ark wasn't reality. It was still just a promise. So might that tell us anything about the faith of Noah and his family?
Sorry, can you repeat that last bit? I didn't hear it.
Where he's saying, they went in because of the waters of the flood that weren't there. So it's like, okay, we're going in because of this thing that doesn't exist yet, right? So who do you think the sons were exhibiting faith in? Just God, or
Their dad.
and I wonder for you ladies, what do you think this might have been like to be the wife of one of the sons of the crazy old man who built a boat in the middle of dry land? And
I think in our culture today that would be crazy, but in their culture back then, submitting to women is pretty normal. I think, and biblically we know that's kind of what we should be doing. But I think most women in American society would be like, oh, I'm not doing that, But I think back then they probably were raised to kind of, trust the men to make those decisions.
I wonder if they had a little more pressure thinking about like, okay, we're gonna have the only kids after this flood. You know what I mean? Like,
Ooh,
I mean,
I hadn't thought about that.
having sons was important anyway, but
Yeah.
like, these are gonna be the only kids.
Yeah.
You know, the importance of having more children.
Maybe the
Yeah.
Lord made that apparent to their hearts, and that was the
Oh.
reason that they
Mm.
followed suit.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
It may have spoke a lot of value into him too, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
like it was
Right.
like you're very I mean, we literally can't do this. Like the earth will not be replenished without you. So like you are super valuable, you know.
We talk about purpose.
Yeah, purpose. Yeah.
Giving somebody a sense of purpose for their lives. Yeah. By the way, that whole the wives submitting, we like to call those the good old days.
Oh,
So that's just
I mean, you can be reclaimed in some ways.
that's what I was just going by what James told me.
right.
So I would never throw somebody under the bus. But if I did,
Yeah. Watch out. Yeah.
so and we've talked about the boys respecting. I mean, what kind of level of respect does this take? I mean, we look at things so often we just kind of gloss over it. But I mean, what might we learn about these boys and these wives and Noah's wife too, for that matter? I mean, 100 years this project's been going on.
I've only been up to the Ark one time now, and I know we'll go back, but having all the kids and family in tow, we didn't get to sit and listen to a lot of they'll do the videos with Noah, interacting with some of the people, but the little bits and pieces that you hear when you're there watching those videos does cause you, to think, oh, this is probably what Noah was going through. So, I mean, you read this story and it's too hard to believe anyway, but then to really go into the mind of Noah or to his sons is kind of another level of haven't ever gone there and thought that before.
I think that this really brought to mind how, especially in our culture, we are so immediate gratification, and then
wow, yeah.
because I was reminded about in the time in like the medieval times when they were building cathedrals, like they would spend 100 years to build they might not even see the completion of this in their lifetime, but they were willing to work on something that big to see the big picture. Like, it's important that I do my work so that this will be here for generations to come. And like to have that mindset rather than being like, well, if I can't do it this year, then I don't know if I really want to put forth the effort. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so like really having a bigger picture of like I can do my little part in something that's way bigger than me. It's not all about me.
The Iroquois Nation is one of my favorite illustrations.
Yeah.
Had a rule that their leaders, when they came together to make a law for the different tribes that made up the nation, they looked at how is this going to affect 7 generations ahead. One of my other favorite stories, and I'm pretty sure it's Oxford, but I haven't read it for a long time. They had the old chapel had been built like 400 years before, and it had these huge beams that had been built with trees that were there growing naturally at that time because the city hadn't grown up around it. And so it came time that they had to renovate because it was 500 years old, and that happens. Right? It's hard for us to even imagine a building making it 500 years here in the States, right? And so they were having this construction meeting, and they're going, man, where would we, there's no old growth timber like that anymore. That there's no place we can get that wood because all the forests, they've cut those kind of available. And so there was one guy in the very back. He was the groundskeeper, and he said, listen, you all need to follow me. And so they walked out of the building, and they walked and they walked and they walked and they walked down these paths, through all these buildings, down these hills, and finally they came out to this one area that nobody ever went to. He had to unlock a gate to go back in there. And he said, here's your trees. And the builders, when they built the building, knew that those beams would have to be repaired at some point. And so they planted the trees and handed down that knowledge to the groundskeeper every generation for half a millennium. So that those, and the trees were exactly what they needed, the size and the type of wood to be able to replace what had worn out. You know, and that's to me, that thinking of those next generations. I mean, that's, I hear people, as a grandparent, I hear people say all the time, yeah, your job's to spoil them and hand them back.
I want to slap those people.
And I'm going, where do you read that? Where do you get that? On what planet am I going to invest my life into my children and then invest the rest of my life into ruining their children? I mean,
Right.
In what galaxy does that logic work, right? Because we want to come alongside our kids, and both our kids different. They parent differently, and that's okay. You know, nobody has to be a lockstep with the way we did. And so I really like that observation of thinking of the future. So we mentioned these animals. Did the animals come to the ark? Look at the story.
Says they came to Noah.
Thanks, I got the.
So, and just as I was looking at the story earlier, that kind of, but because that's repeated later on, that those two of every creature that has breath of life, and it came to Noah and entered the ark. So they came to Noah. So, is there a difference between going to Noah and going to the ark?
Yeah, it's much more relational this way. It's like clear God has appointed a leader. That's of what's happening, and the animals are submitting to him, which is in line with the Genesis 1-2 commission, right? Which is like, man, go forth and rule over the animals. So they're everything. This is clearly in alignment with the writer of the story, as opposed to just robotic movements of things around the place.
That would have been really awkward if you hadn't built the ark. And
The animals show up.
The animals were like, and Noah, and then they're like, what do
Major
I-
guilt trip as you die. The floods are coming. Should have built the ark.
Should have built the
So
ark.
sorry, guys.
Yeah, you're just consoling these animals. They're like, oh, excuse me.
Well, you know, you mentioned that. That was a choice Noah had,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that was a choice. I mean, God didn't hold him down and twist his arm until he started to build the ark. And when did the animals come?
After they got on, right? Before the rain.
Before the rain. So 7 days before the flood came. Right? We talked a little bit earlier about the possibility that there were probably doubting moments, right? I mean, that would, and I can imagine those conversations happening with the sons and their wives when they're away from mom and dad, right? It's like,
Yeah.
had you ever thought about the fact your old man's crazy? You know, I mean, that's. Could God have sent the animals earlier to kind of give a little confirmation of what he was doing?
Could have, but then they've got to care for him, right?
Does it seem like God's asking a lot of Noah and his family in this preparation time?
Yes, everything. That was all their time. Like their future, their preparation, their relationships. Yes, everything.
One of the things I love about going to the Ark is they really make you think about, they had to pay builders, probably.
Yeah, I never thought about
possibly.
that. I think, I just assumed they did it themselves.
Yeah,
but
I
you're
think I
right.
assumed that too. Yeah.
They very well could have contracted out a lot of work.
And probably don't know that they could have grown. Well, they could have, but they probably had to have supplies of some kind. Because it wasn't just them they were feeding. Right? It's one thing if you're getting enough. I'm guessing you all have a garden. And I'm guessing you have a garden in Ohio, right? No, you don't.
Her mom's not a gardener.
Okay. Wow. I was making an assumption because pretty much most of the families I know that are a little larger.
Right.
My.
Autumn's gonna introduce it to her.
Yeah. So we're training her right now on a garden. So she's
okay.
gonna take that back.
My stepbrother, they had 10 kids, and so they grew a lot. Every place they ever lived, they grew a lot.
Yeah.
But it was just for them.
Sure.
Right? So I find it interesting. Does God anywhere give us the number of animals?
Biologists would love it if he had done that.
Yeah. Yeah. But what information does he share with us?
He also doesn't say how long they're going to be on the ark. He doesn't tell them how long they're prepped for.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah.
Because they're on there for almost a year.
Yeah.
Was it that long?
Before they finally get off, yeah.
Oh, yeah. The waters.
Yeah.
Before the water's fully
Yeah,
received.
that's right.
I mean, I can barely pack for like a week trip for my family.
Yeah.
But I know how long it's going to be.
Right. Yeah. The amount of we can, and the amount of forethought going into that, or even regenerative, that's the way the ark is so cool.
Yes.
Think about water supply. It took so much thought and even engineering prowess to be able to do that.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Looking at God's faithfulness, even when there were probably times that didn't, that there was questioning going on. That's human nature, right? That's part of who we are. But God was faithful. That's it. Wow, that was awesome.
It's not normal to do
No,
something like that.
Today, are there still times that God asks His people to do things that cause us to kind of wonder and question?
Oh, yeah.
Does that happen?
All the time,
Yeah. What are some of the kind of situations that, just in general, that would come our way, maybe?
I kind of felt like that with taking on this new role as a director for our homeschool group. That that I think I've already explained that process. But in the beginning, it was kind of like it was really on my mind, and I'm like, all right, somebody's gonna have to step up here.
We need this.
Yeah, come on, guys. And then it just really was heavy on me. I'm gonna have to do this, aren't I? And but God has been so faithful to equip me because that was my biggest holdup. There's no way I could do something like that.
Yeah.
And on my own I couldn't. But I felt very okay, the only way I can do this is if God provides. And
Yeah, that's. Anybody else? Can you think of a circumstance or? So kids get louder than that.
no, it's okay.
Oh, okay.
You don't have to leave.
That bother us.
It's okay. I got it.
I just think of one of the common things that you hear people say is God never gives you more than you can handle.
Oh, I know.
Go.
And
Where
my
do you read
response is always to him, listen, God continually gives me more than I can handle because God wants me to realize that He's my only hope in this. You know, and it took me years to realize that. I was right along with those people. You know, yeah, God's never going to give you more. Well, wait a minute. Yeah, He gives you more than you can handle quite often. Otherwise, we would never look to Him. Yeah, otherwise we'd never need the help.
Yeah.
I mean, I can think of a lot of times over the years. A lot of times through prophetic prayer, where the Lord will give us something either to ourselves or through somebody else, and either tell us we're going to do something or ask us to do something. You're just like, what? Like, I'm gonna do that? You have to do what? And you just like, you have this moment of being like, are you sure, God? You're like, okay, all right. If you say that, then I guess it's possible. And it's not at this scale, obviously, but you still have that miniature version of these emotions of like, is this really? Is this possible? Like, okay, let's start down the road, you know.
You know, we when my wife and I got married at Eastern, actually on the campus at Eastern at the chapel, and then we moved to Florida almost immediately. And we were there for 20 years. I was a church planter, and we had a great time. And we felt God calling us to come back home, which was kind of hard because I was in a church that I loved. I loved the people, and you know, I was the only pastor they'd ever had. And I didn't know anybody here because when I lived here, I was selling dope. So a little different crowd that I was running in. So we started praying together as a family because my Paige was in 7th grade and Kurt was in 9th grade. And we moved in the middle of their school year that year. And we moved to Nicholasville because, again, God kind of spoke to me on a prayer trip. I went to Hughes Auditorium and spent basically 5 days just praying and fasting about what to do, and God led us to the school district our kids were supposed to be in and some of those things. You know, we moved here and it was brutal. It was just hard. I hadn't realized how much of my self-identity was in the fact I was a pastor. And I was preaching 8 or 9 times a week, and all of a sudden I couldn't teach a Sunday school class or do anything. And I was making minimum wage. My boss was a 22-year-old menopausal woman, which was, it was an interesting scenario.
22.
Yeah, it was brutal, just brutal. And yet, as a family, because we had prayed and we were all on the same page spiritually, even with all the difficulties that we dealt with, we were able to persevere because we knew we were doing what God called us to do. And now looking back, I mean, it's the greatest thing God's, you know, all the things that's opened up for us as a family, for us as individuals, you know, for the church. And there are times I wonder, what if we hadn't obeyed, even though it didn't make a lot, because we didn't have any money. We actually loaded up our U-Haul. I had just enough money for gas and a hotel room.
Wow.
No money for rent or a deposit on a house we got. God, that night, God provided $2,000 from just a variety of sources, which also helped us when we, like, you know, remember when God did that? He'll do that again, and He did. But so just real quickly, what's something in this story that a step of obedience that we might consider as individuals? What's an area here?
You're saying about the story or just in our own lives?
Just in our own lives that comes from what, you know, the brief part of the story. We only made it through 4 verses.
I think a lot of times I get caught up in the how. I'm a planner, I'm an organizer, I'm really good at like figuring out, okay, this time the kids are going to eat, so we have to do this ahead of time, you know. But a lot of times that actually paralyzes me from doing things. So I think that's what I kind of took away, is that like we don't know exactly what was going on in Noah's heart every moment, but like
Right.
I feel like he walked forward on what God had given him and expected God to do the rest. And I think that's kind of my heart of repentance, is like I want to do that more, is like not be held back by my own this isn't going to work out because of my planning, or even be held back by my own control, but kind of release control of things and just be like, Lord, if you said to do it, we'll do it, and we will walk forward in that, expecting you to meet us. But just kind of like, just continually like releasing control in those things, releasing control, especially as a mom. I think as a mom, that's really hard.
That's a good word.
So anyway, we're like opposite personalities. So like she loves to plan and deals with control, and I'm like, I don't want to plan anything to a detriment that things
Yeah.
fall apart.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I read this
I-
and literally
yeah.
take the opposite message where I'm like, I know God will show up in those moments of miraculous things, but I'm like, oh, I don't need to do anything to make that
Yeah.
happen. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh no, Noah's actually
more
hiring
fun that way.
contractors,
Yeah.
building a boat for 100 years. So like there's even things now, like I won't get into it, but God's told me in like 8 years your family's gonna be doing this, and there's like these things I know I need to be doing, and I'm like, oh,
God will handle it.
it'll happen.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm like, no, I
Yeah.
think I actually need to plan for those.
Yeah.
So I'm prepared when God shows up. Like I'm not, the animals.
Yeah, so when the animals come,
don't show
you're
up,
not
I'm like,
like,
oh, I was gonna do that next
Yeah.
week.
Oh, right. Can you hold on for a second?
Yeah.
Rain, don't come down, please. I love that the Lord talked to us in those opposite ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Lord, we thank you for your word. We thank you for your faithfulness. And we thank you, Lord, for the way, just like all the animals were so different, that we as your children, you wired us differently as well. And you use us anyway, in spite of those, and oftentimes intertwining those differences. So just may your word sink deep down into who we are this week, and may you find us obedient to the things you lead us to do. For in Christ's name we pray. Amen.